This is ACT25MC1 from the 2025-2026 new Big Red Prep Book. They've changed the timing on the reading. So the old format ACT was 35 minutes for 40 questions, which comes out to 52 and a half seconds per question. This format here that we're going to dive into is 40 minutes for 36 questions, which gives you 66.7 seconds per question. Now, does that extra 14 seconds per question help? I'm hoping so. My guess would be that it's still hard to do the test perfectly fast enough, but I'm going to put that to the test right now. So I'm actually going to start the timer, and it's been my argument that you should always actually read the entire passage first. I'm going to try to read it very quickly out loud, which I think would take about 3 minutes, and then look back at the passage for every question. So here we go. Literary narrative. The bowl was perfect. Perhaps it was not what you'd select if you faced a shelf of bowls, and not the sort of thing that would inevitably attract a lot of attention at a crafts fair, yet it had real presence. It was as predictably admired as a mutt who had no reason to suspect he might be funny. Just such a dog, in fact, was often brought out and in along with the bowl. Andrea was a real estate agent, and when she thought that some prospective buyers might be dog lovers, she would drop off her dog at the same time she placed the bowl in the house that was up for sale. She would put a dish of water in the kitchen for Mondo, taking his squeaking plastic frog out of her purse and drop it on the floor. Take his squeaking plastic frog out of her purse and drop it on the floor. He would pounce delightedly, just as he did every day at home, batting around his favorite toy. The bowl usually sat on a coffee table, though recently she had displayed it on top of a pine blanket chest and on a lacquered table. It was once placed on a cherry table beneath a glorious still life painting where it held its own. Everyone who has purchased a home or who has wanted to sell a house must be familiar with some of the tricks used to convince a buyer that the house is quite special. A fire in the fireplace in early evening, jonquils in a pitcher on the kitchen counter where no one ordinarily has a space to put flowers, perhaps the slight aroma of spring made by a single drop of scent vaporizing from a lamp bulb. The wonderful thing about the bowl, Andrea thought, was that it was both subtle and noticeable, a paradox of a bowl. Its glaze was the color of cream and seemed to glow no matter what light was placed in it. There were a few bits of color in it, shiny geometric flashes, and some of these were tinged with flecks of silver. They were as mysterious as cells seen under a microscope. It was difficult not to study them because they shimmered, flashing for a split second, and then resumed their shape. Something about the colors and the random placement suggested motion. People who liked country furniture always commented on the bowl, but then it turned out that people who felt comfortable with opulence loved it just as much. But the bowl was not at all ostentatious or even so noticeable that anyone would suspect that it had been put in place deliberately. They might notice the height of the ceiling on first entering a room, and only when their eye moved down from that or away from the refraction of sunlight on a pale wall would they see the bowl. Then they would go immediately to it and comment, yet they always faltered when they tried to say something. Perhaps it was because they were in the house for a serious reason, not to notice some object. Once, Andrea got a call from a woman who had not put in an offer on a house she had shown her. That bowl, she said. Would it be possible to find out where the owners had bought that beautiful bowl? Andrea pretended that she did not know what the woman was referring to. A bowl somewhere in the house? Oh, on a table under the window. Yes, she would ask, of course. She let a couple days pass, then called back to say that the bowl had been a present and the people did not know where it had been purchased. She was sure that the bowl brought her luck. Bids were often put in on houses when she had displayed the bowl. Sometimes the owners, who were always asked to be away or to step outside when the house was being shown, didn't even know that the bowl had been in their house. Once, she could not imagine how, she left it behind, and then she was so afraid that something might have happened to it that she rushed back to the house and sighed with relief when the owner opened the door. The bowl, Andrea explained. She had purchased a bowl and set it on the chest for safekeeping while she toured the house with the prospective buyers, and she felt like rushing past the frowning woman and seizing the bowl. The owner stepped aside. In the few seconds before Andrea picked up the bowl, she realized that the owner must have just seen that it had been placed perfectly, that the sunlight struck the bluer part of it. Her pitcher had been moved to the far side of the chest and the bowl predominated. All the way home, Andrea wondered how she could have left the bowl behind. It was like leaving a friend at an outing, just walking off. Sometimes there were stories in the paper about families forgetting a child somewhere and driving to the next city. Andrea had only gone a mile down the road before she remembered. The point of view from which the passage is told is best described as that of, so you have first person and third person. Well, it's not first person because it doesn't have the word I, right? So third-person narrator present in the action who relates the thoughts and feelings of many characters, or third-person narrator not present in the action who relates the thoughts and feelings of primarily one character. It's definitely D as in dog, because it's in the head of what Andrea is thinking the entire time, none of the other characters. The passage as a whole can best be described as an exploration of the career of a real estate agent and the agent's typical mundane no, that's too negative, and it's not about her career. It's about the bowl specifically. Special glaze on a bowl, and why the glaze makes the bowl both subtle and noticeable. I don't think it's the glaze specifically. It's the bowl in general. Perceived perfection of an object and that object's effect on people. I think so. Problems that can result from a person's unyielding focus on obtaining... No. It's focused on the bowl, right? The passage most strongly suggests that a useful characteristic of the bowl, in terms of Andrea's purpose for the object, is the bowl's... I remember something about ostentatious, but I thought it said it was not ostentatious. Where is that? Okay, it's not at all ostentatious. Okay, so it's not this. It's famous designer, commercial availability, universal appeal. I think it's universal appeal, but I always want to go back and find where it actually says that. It had real presence. People who liked country furniture always commented on the bowl, but then it turned out that people who felt comfortable with opulence loved it just as much. So everybody seems to like it. I know it's this one. I'm not seeing where it says universal, but I'm confident enough to say that the universal appeal is that everybody likes it. In 53 to 75, Andrea responds to an inquiry about her bowl and explains why her bowl was placed in a client's home with statements that can best be described as, in 53 to 75, she responds, so 53 to 75 is all the way from here to here. So somebody calls to say, would it be possible to find out where the owners had bought that beautiful bowl? Andrea pretended that she did not know. She would ask, then she calls back and say it had been a present. Well, that's just not true because it's her bowl. It's not the owner's bowl at all. So it seems like it's just not true. Generalization, absolutely. No. No, it's just a lie, right? It's just a lie. Okay. In the passage, Andrea is characterized as believing that compared to most tricks used by real estate agents to impress potential buyers, her trick of placing the bowl in a home is... Compared to most tricks, that's up here, right? So, must be familiar with some of the tricks, and then it lists some of the tricks. Sure. And then the wonderful thing about the bowl is that it was both subtle and noticeable. So it is kind of a trick, although I would have said it matches with subtle here. So is that not humorous? Definitely not more obvious. Placing the bowl in a home is less familiar. It's definitely not less enticing. It's got to be less familiar. So, I guess, yeah, it's as mysterious. And so it must be less familiar. According to the passage, the random placement of colors in the bowl's glaze creates a surface that, I just saw that up here. That's somewhere right in here. A few bits of color, tiny geometric flashes, and some of these were tinged with flecks of silver. Here we go. Because they shimmered, flashing for a split second, and then resumed their shape, something about the colors and their random placement suggested motion. That's that, right? That's, yeah. Seems to move. One main point of the fifth paragraph, 53 to 62, is that 53 to 62. That's when somebody calls and she lies and pretends to not even know what they're referring to about the bowl. Andrea's bowl sometimes attracts more interest than does the house itself. Maybe. Andrea's bowl does not actually belong to her, but she hopes to find its owner. No, definitely not. Andrea is often asked about the bowl when a client puts in an offer on a house. Well, no, because it doesn't say, had not put an offer on a house, so no. Andrea sometimes forgets where in a house she has placed the bowl. No, it's definitely attracts more interest than the house itself. Now, does it say that even more specifically somewhere? Well, I guess it's sort of implied because The woman had not put an offer on the house. So she doesn't want to buy the house, but she does very specifically remember the bowl. So that's sort of implied there. In the passage, the admiration the bowl received is directly compared to the admiration received by, I thought it just said a mutt. Didn't it say that word in the beginning? Yeah, it is as predictably admired as a mutt who has no reason to suspect he might be funny. Passage suggests that one reason prospective homebuyers have difficulty sharing their thoughts about the bowl is that they realize I think that's up here. They might notice the height of the ceiling. Then they would go immediately and comment to it and comment on the bowl. Yet they always faltered when they tried to say something new. Perhaps it was because they were in the house for a serious reason. I think it's this. They were in the house for a serious reason not to notice some object. They are not visiting the home for the purpose of... I think it's that one, right? Yeah. They do not want to reveal that they have the financial means. No. Andrea might start talking about the bowl instead of discussing... No. Andrea might find the bowl even more No. And there we go. So we're at 9, and we are now at 10 minutes and 15 seconds. So I am right smack on time. I guess I'm also explaining this as I go, so I would have done it a little bit faster myself. So, interesting. I'm going to pause for just a moment, but I'm going to take away that it took me just a hair over 10 minutes, which is the exact time that you would have. And again, if I weren't trying to explain it very carefully and read it out loud, I probably could have done it maybe 10 or 20% faster. Definitely not 50% faster, but I probably could have done it in 1 or maybe 2 minutes less, so it'd be just under the timing. Still not easy timing, though. Passage 2. Originally cultivated in the Ottoman Empire, tulips were introduced to Europe at the end of the 16th century and became wildly popular in the 17th century. One crucial element of the beauty of the tulip that intoxicated the Dutch, the Turks, the French, and the English has been lost to us. To them, the tulip was a magic flower because it was prone to spontaneous and brilliant eruptions of color. In a planting of 100 tulips, one of them might be so possessed, opening to reveal the white or yellow ground of its petals painted, as if by the finest brush and steadiest hand, with intricate feathers or flames of a vividly contrasting hue. When this happened, the tulip was said to have broken. And if a tulip broke in a particularly striking manner, if the flames of the applied color reached clear to the petal's lip, say, and its pigment was brilliant and pure and its pattern symmetrical, the owner of that bulb had won the lottery. For the offsets of that bulb would inherit its pattern and hues and command a fantastic price. The offsets. I think that's the other flowers that are bred from it. The fact that broken tulips for some unknown reason produced fewer and smaller offsets than ordinary tulips drove their prices still higher. Semper Augustus was the most famous such break. Semper Augustus, which is from the Latin for always bold, always august, always pretty. The closest we have to a broken tulip today is the group known as the Rembrandts, so named because Rembrandt painted some of the most admired breaks of his time. But these latter-day tulips, with their heavy patterning of one or more contrasting colors, look clumsy by comparison, as if painted in haste with a thick brush. To judge from the paintings we have of the originals, the petals of broken tulips could be as fine and intricate as marbleized papers, the extravagant swirls of color somehow managing to seem both bold and delicate at once. In the most striking examples, such as the fiery carmine, which I think is deep red, right? Carmine, that Semper Augustus splashed on its pure white background, the outbreak of color juxtaposed with the orderly, linear form of the tulip could be breathtaking, with the leaping, wayward patterns just barely contained by the petal's edge. Anna Pavard recounts the extraordinary lengths to which Dutch growers would go to make their tulips break, sometimes borrowing their techniques from alchemists who faced what must have seemed a comparable challenge. Over the earth above a bed planted with white tulips, gardeners would liberally sprinkle paint powders of the desired hue on the theory that rainwater would wash the color down to the roots, where it would be taken up by the bulb. Charlatans, as in liars or hucksters or people selling false things, sold recipes believed to produce the magic color breaks. Pigeon droppings were thought to be an effective agent, as was plaster dust taken from the walls of old houses. Unlike the alchemists, whose attempts to change base metal into gold reliably failed, now and then the would-be tulip changers would be rewarded with a good break, inspiring everybody to redouble their efforts. What the Dutch could not have known was that a virus was responsible for the magic of the broken tulip, a fact that, as soon as it was discovered, doomed the beauty it had made possible. The color of a tulip actually consists of two pigments working in concert, a base color that is always yellow or white, and a second laid-on color called an anthocyanin. The mix of these two hues determines the unitary color we see. The virus works by partially and irregularly suppressing the anthocyanin, thereby allowing a portion of the underlying color to show through. It wasn't until the 1920s, after the invention of the electron microscope, that scientists discovered the virus was being spread from tulip to tulip by Mysis persicae, the peach potato aphid. Aphid, which is a bug, right? Like a little potato bug. Peach trees were a common feature of 17th century gardens. By the 1920s, the Dutch regarded their tulips as commodities to trade rather than jewels to display, and since the virus weakened the bulbs it infected, the reason the offsets of broken tulips were so small and few in number, Dutch growers set about ridding their fields of the infection. Color breaks, when they did appear, were promptly destroyed, and a certain peculiar manifestation of natural beauty abruptly lost its claim on human affection. I can't help thinking the virus was supplying something the tulip needed, just the touch of abandon the flower's chilly formality called for. The touch of abandon, as in, that doesn't mean to neglect someone. I think abandon is kind of like wildness or craziness or extremity. Maybe that's why the broken tulip became such a treasure in 17th century Holland. The wayward color, wayward is like wild and fanciful and bright, which I think it said over here also. Loosed on a tulip by a good break perfected the flower, even as the virus responsible set about destroying it. On its face, the story of the virus and the tulip would seem to throw a wrench into any evolutionary understanding of beauty. The main purpose of the passage is to highlight changes in the flower industry from the 17th century through today. I don't think so. It focuses definitely on the break in the tulip. It's all about the tulip. Examine the way certain plants have been represented in art over... No, it's not plants plural. It's definitely tulips. Provide an overview of plant viruses and the way they affect the flower market. No. Explain a particular flower variation. Yeah, the variation is the break, right? Break is when the flower suddenly changes in its hereditary pattern. The main point of the second paragraph, 21 to 36, is that closest thing we have to a broken tulip today is the group known as the Rembrandts. Now, Rembrandt himself, I believe, was a Dutch painter, but was Rembrandt alive at the time? I can't remember exactly when Rembrandt painted, but you don't have to know that. So because Rembrandt painted some of the most admired breaks of his time, but these latter day, so he painted them later. Okay, so the 17th, so the vivid breaks happened in the 1600s, and Rembrandt, I'm guessing, happened in, I don't know, the 1700s or the 1800s. So it's later. So modern Rembrandt tulips have been painted by many of today's, no. Compared to 17th century broken tulips, today's multicolored tulips are less visually appealing. I think so, because it says, heavy patterning of one or more contrasting colors look clumsy by comparison, as if painted in haste. Yeah, they're not as amazing looking. I think it's that one. The tulip break known as Semper Augustus was a striking example of the 17th century broken tulip. Well, that is true, but that's not the main point of the paragraph. That's saying that the originals were amazing, but they're comparing the ones we have today with the ones that they actually, or the ones they had later with the ones they had originally. Rembrandt was responsible for painting the most, again, that's maybe true, but not the answer. It can reasonably be inferred from the passage that some 17th century tulip growers believed tulip breaks were mainly caused by, isn't that when they tried to make it on their own, right? So over the earth, they sprinkled paint powders of the desired hue on the theory that the rainwater would wash down. I think it's that. Suppliers' storage conditions, diseased tulip bulbs, certain growing techniques, certain weather patterns. It's not weather patterns. It must be growing techniques, right? It's how they're grown. Oh, sorry. Yeah, it says techniques, right? Borrowing their techniques, well, from alchemists, but then they sprinkled stuff into the water that washed in, and then, yeah, these are techniques like putting pigeon droppings on it or paint dust, whatever it is. But D as in dog is the trick wrong. It's not weather patterns. Okay. The information in 57 to 64 primarily functions to 57 to 64. So the color of a tulip actually consists of two pigments. Yeah, the virus works by partially and irregularly suppressing the anthocyanin, thereby allowing a portion of the under... I would have said this functions to explain the science. So when they actually eventually figured out how the coloring of the tulip works in its regular and diseased case, that's the scientific explanation. Now, what answer is that? Describe the range of... No. Explain how the color variation of broken tulip occurs. I think so. Argue that yellow and white are the only... No. Indicate why broken tulips contain no no, it's explaining how it works. The sixth paragraph, 7985, differs from the rest of the passage in that it... I can't help... Well, I'm just going to guess it's this, because all of a sudden, whoever's talking says, I can't help, and there was no I up until that moment. So I'm just guessing it says, questions whether some of the viruses cause broken tulips... Argues that growers should have dealt with broken tulips differently. Challenges the idea that broken tulips were beautiful. Presents a personal... It seems it has to be. Presents a personal meditation. A personal meditation. So this doesn't mean what you think it means. This doesn't mean that you're like doing yoga and praying while you're channeling your thoughts. A meditation is like the meditations of Marcus Aurelius. They're his private thoughts, his personal feelings that he's expressing in words. So it's got to be this, right? The first person all of a sudden. According to the passage, in the 17th century, the fact that broken tulip bulbs tended to produce fewer and smaller offsets compared to typical tulip bulbs resulted in... that was up here somewhere. Oh, it's here. The fact that broken tulips, for some unknown reason, produced fewer and smaller offsets than ordinary tulips drove their prices still higher. A decrease in... No. A fear among growers... No. An increase... Yeah. Desire among growers... No. In the passage, the author compares broken tulips as they are represented in Rembrandt's paintings to... The petals of broken tulips... To judge from the paintings we have of the originals... So... The petals of broken tulips could be as fine and intricate as marbleized paper. Isn't it that? So... Intricately marbleized papers. I think so. Peach tree blossom. No, that's way later. Paint powders. No, that's the thing they do to try to make it break, but it doesn't work. Painting hastily done with a thick brush. The author compares broken tulips as they are represented in Rembrandt's paintings. So, Rembrandt painted some of the most admired breaks of his time. Oh, now I see. Okay, so Rembrandt painted the beautiful ones, but today we call them the Rembrandts even though they're not as beautiful. That's really confusing, and I think I might have explained that the wrong way before, but I'm trying to wrap my head around this. So these latter-day tulips, okay, to judge from the paintings we have of the original. So the originals are of the beautiful ones, of the actual original breaks that are beautiful. The petals of the broken tulips can be as fine and intricate as it must be the marbleized papers, right? Okay. The passage author would most likely mentions that peach trees were a staple of 17th century gardens too. That was up here, right? Peach trees were a common feature of 17th century gardens. Yeah, but you have to read a couple lines before that to make sense of this. So, the virus works by partially and irregularly suppressing the anthocyanin, thereby allowing a portion of the underlying color to show through. It wasn't until the 1920s, after the invention of the electron microscope, that scientists discovered the virus was being spread from tulip to tulip by MP, the peach potato aphid. Peach trees were a common feature of 17th century. So I think you're saying the reason that those bugs were able to spread it is that those bugs lived in peach trees, and peach trees were common. Now, what answer is that? Highlight a crop favored by growers who did not cultivate tulips. Emphasize that peach trees were not as popular. What? Are not as popular in gardens today? No. Emphasize how peach potato aphids spread the tulip virus. Yeah. Compare tulips to another... No. Yes. As is used in 80, the word abandon... So I had sort of looked at that word and said that's an unusual usage. To do something with abandon is to do it with enormous zest and energy and sort of like a wild feeling where you You have no regard for the consequences. So I can't help thinking that the virus was supplying something the tulip needed, just the touch of abandon that flower's chilly formality called for. So that's like saying the flower is normally very staid and level and has no extreme behavior, but when you have the virus, it makes it like wild and passionate. So just the touch of abandon. I would have said wildness. Yeah, uninhibitedness. Yeah, it's not relinquishment, retreat, denial, no. And that's it. So, how are we on time? I wasn't running the stopwatch. Okay, I feel silly. I'm guessing that was about 10 or 11 minutes. I guess somebody could check on this video. So, I'm going to stop for just a moment. So, that last passage was actually 13 and a half minutes if you check the video. Now, I was pausing to define a few things, and of course, I was reading it aloud carefully myself. I just checked. The average person reads aloud about 1/4 slower than they read silently. So I guess you could account for a minute and a half or two for that. But again, even with the timing on the new enhanced ACT, the timing on the reading is still not easy. If you want to do all the passages and get all the way through, you have to really, really focus. So I'm going to actually hit the timer on this. I'm going to try to provide less explanation and just do it myself, basically. In the first sense of the term, hip-hop refers collectively to a group of related art forms in different media, visual sound movement that were produced in Afro-Caribbean, African-American, and Latino neighborhoods in New York City in the 1970s. The term, when used in this sense, also refers to the events at which these forms were practiced, the people who practiced them, their shared aesthetic sensibility, and contemporary activities that maintain those traditions. Perhaps the most important aspect of this variety of hip-hop is that it is unmediated, in the sense that most of the practices associated with it are both taught and performed in the context of face-to-face interactions between human beings. To some degree, this constitutes an intentional rejection of the mass media by its practitioners, but to a great extent it is just the natural result of the practices themselves. Activities like b-boying and graffiti writing are simply not well suited to the mass media. Although in both cases, brief attempts were made to bring these forms of expression into mainstream contexts, b-boying in a series of low-budget bricksploitation movies in the early 1980s and graffiti as part of a short-lived gallery trend around the same time, neither developed substantially in those environments. That, it has been suggested, was not so much because the forms lacked appeal, but because, on an economic level, b-boying was an advertisement with no product. The reality is reflected in the phrase that is often used to refer to this branch of hip-hop culture, which suggests something that is lived rather than bought and sold. The second sense of the term hip-hop refers to a form of popular music that developed, or was developed, out of hip-hop culture. This hip-hop, also known as rap music, resulted from the interaction between hip-hop culture and the pre-existing music industry. As we would expect, this hip-hop features elements of both sensibilities. My students are often surprised when I point out that even when hip-hop lyrics seem to reject every aspect of mainstream culture and morality, the one thing they almost never reject is a strict 16-bar verse structure derived from Tin Pan Alley pop music. But this should not be surprising. This hip-hop, in contrast to hip-hop culture, is deeply intertwined with the mass media and its needs, largely because it does have a product: records, CDs, MP3s, and ringtones. Okay, so when it's passage A and passage B, you should read just passage A and expect that probably 3 or 4 questions come first for just that. I think that's here and here. As is used in line 38, the word sensibilities most nearly means. 38. I'm going to read from the beginning of the sentence in which it appears, which is, this hip-hop, also known as rap music, resulted from the interaction between hip-hop culture and the pre-existing music industry. As we would expect, this hip-hop features elements of both sensibilities. Both sensibilities is both meanings of the word, I think, of both, of both perspectives, right? That's referring to the first and the second sense, right? The first sense and the second sense. Based on passage A, which statement best captures the relationship between Tin Pan Alley pop music and rap music? Well, that definitely came at the end. So the verse structure was derived from Tin Pan Alley pop music. That is the verse structure of Yeah, the verse structure of the second sense of hip-hop down here in this paragraph when it goes along with the mainstream music industry. Rap artists have rejected every aspect? No. Rap artists have been aware of Tin Pan Alley Pop, but not influenced by it. Tin Pan Alley Pop developed at the same time. Tin Pan Alley Pop has influenced many rap artists. So, I think if you look after... here we go. But this should not be surprising. This hip-hop, in contrast to hip-hop culture, is deeply intertwined with the mass media and its needs. So I think because of deeply intertwined, it's closely connected. So I think it's D as in dog. Which of the following details does the author of passage B? Because now we have to read the second passage. Okay. It wasn't until I was 9 years old, late in 1979, that I even heard the words hip and hop strung together or was able to grasp the notion of what being a rapper actually meant. That was when, fatefully, I heard a record that changed my life and pop culture forever. Like it's yesterday, I can still remember that moment over at my aunt's home in Brooklyn, where it seemed there was always a party underway with relatives and neighbors hanging out, a great spread of food, and new hot music on the record player. Most stereo systems in those days could be adapted for the single two-sided records that were smaller and had the big hole in the middle, 45 RPM, as well as the bigger records with the small holes, 33 1/3 RPM, which were the full albums that had several songs on each side. But as the intro plays to what I recognize as Good Times by the group Chic, and I'm drawn into the living room because it's a familiar hit song, it's a familiar hit song from the previous summer, I encounter a record on the turntable that defies categorization. Instead of the sweet female lead vocals of that disco smash, I hear something totally different and spot a baby blue label on the black vinyl record I've never seen before, even though it's a 12-inch disc the size of the album. As I listen to the rhyming words being spoken, singing on and on and on, the beat don't stop until it hits me that this entire side is one long song. Almost 15 minutes long, as it turns out, or to be exact, 14 minutes and 36 seconds of pure fun laid over the thumping bass beat from the break of Good Times, with sing-along words easy to remember and repeat. The record, I discover, is by an unknown group, the Sugar Hill Gang, and is called Rapper's Delight. From then on, nobody ever has to tell me what rap is. It's whatever words are spoken, chanted, or talk sung, or whatever philosophy, stories, or ideas are espoused by the house party master of ceremonies. Oh, did I miss a question? Oh, I feel silly. Okay. According to the passage A, one reason elements of hip-hop culture, such as b-boying, are rarely represented in mass media is that these art forms... So let me go back to here, right? I feel really silly, but I can fix that. B-boying. So, to some degree, cause an intentional rejection by the mass media, its practitioners, but it's just a natural result of these practices themselves. Okay. Activities like b-boying and graffiti writing are simply not well suited to the mass media. Have never been are not bought and sold as products, do not appeal to young people, decline in popular, definitely not this. Let me keep going here. So, here we go. Okay. B-boying was an advertisement with no product. Reflected by the branch, which suggests something that is lived rather than bought and sold. Yeah, so it's not bought and sold, which is this. Okay, now to passage B. Which of the following details does the author of passage B highlight as one that caused Rapper's Delight to stand out as different compared to other songs? So, wasn't that the defies categorization? Yeah. Instead of the sweet female lead vocals, here's something totally different spotted. Even though it's a 12-inch disc size, yeah, it hits me that this entire album... The entire side is one long song. I think it's that it's a super, super long song, right? Yeah. In the context of passage B, the main point of the third paragraph is that the author was 62 to 76. The author was, I would have said, very, very impressed by this novel song, right? Struck by the combination of new and established musical elements in the music. Uncomfortable with what he viewed... No. More interested in an unfamiliar album label than in the new music that... No. Convinced that the new form of music he was hearing would become more popular than disco. Struck stands out to me. Struck by the combination of new and established musical elements in the music he was hearing. Let me see if I can match that more specifically. So, it's a familiar hit song from the previous summer, but it defies categorization. So it's familiar but defies categorization, which must be, new and established and new. Yeah. Based on passage B, it can reasonably infer that the author views his first exposure to rap music as, it's got to be the transformative experience, right? It's got to be, because the whole thing is about how the person was stunned and transfixed by how much it changed them. Compared to passage A, passage B focuses more on early hip-hop's interaction with the marketplace. Definitely not. Attempts to move hip-hop art and get the mass meet. No. Oh, yeah, of course, personal experience. It's just a first-person narrative of what happened in that moment. Which of the following elements of passage B is not included in passage A? A story involving a particular rap song. I think it actually is that one, right? Because the first one doesn't mention any particular song at all, so it just has to be that, right? But let me scroll through. Discussion of the early days. No. Mention of New York City area. No. Acknowledgement of raps. No. The author of both passages would most likely agree with the idea that early rap music represented artists' rejection of the music industry and its practices, represented a significant development in American popular culture. I think so. Was more popular than today's rap music. No. Was slow to find an audience. No. A significant development in American popular culture. I think that's sort of implied by what says that in passage 1 or passage A, but it's implied by the speaker's grand realization, now I know what rap is, which suggests how important the development was in the history of music. So I think is B. Now let's check the time. I'm at, just a little bit over 10 minutes. So if I had read it in my head rather than out loud and not been explaining it, I probably could have done that, maybe 2 minutes less. But again, even then, even as an adult taking this test, it's not easy to do the reading with much extra time. Okay, last passage. The term living fossil refers to creatures that had emerged long ago and seemed to have stopped evolving. Like all living fossils, crocodiles were thought to have emerged in the distant past and then stayed largely unchanged. The standard theory held that the crocodilian species we know today originated in Africa during the Cretaceous 145 to 66 million years ago, when the 7 continents were much closer together. As the continents drifted apart, the crocodilians went with them, explaining how they ended up in a band of tropics encircling the globe. If that were true, then modern crocodilian species should be very different from one another at the level of genes and molecules, because there would have been more than enough time for substantial mutations to accumulate. By the 1990s, however, molecular analysis revealed that immune system molecules conserved across living crocodilian species were remarkably similar in structure and behavior. Intrigued by this puzzle, a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Washington named Jamie Oakes began collecting DNA samples from all 23 living crocodilian species, comparing sections of the genome where mutations were most likely to have appeared. Oakes did not find nearly as many differences between the modern crocodilian genomes as one would expect had those species diverged all the way back in the Cretaceous. He concluded that modern crocodilian species split from their last common ancestors between 8 and 13 million years ago, not long before ancient hominins split from their last common ancestor with chimpanzees. The living fossil theory of crocodiles had overestimated their evolutionary age by a factor of 10. Oakes also noticed something odd about the DNA samples he had acquired from the iconic Nile crocodiles, Crocodilus niloticus. They did not match up with each other. In fact, the variation between them was great enough to suggest that he was looking at 2 distinct species. If so, then not only were modern crocodiles much too young to be living fossils, but they had also continued to speciate after diverging from their basal ancestor, something living fossils are not supposed to do. On its own, Oakes' study was intriguing, but not enough to convince the larger scientific community to cleave the Nile crocodile into 2 species. Unbeknownst to him, however, a separate team of scientists was preparing to corroborate his results. In the early 2000s, on an excursion to Chad, the wildlife conservationist Michael Clemens encountered some odd little crocodiles in a desert oasis. They were so docile that he and his companions could swim beside them without concern. He took a tissue sample from one that had recently perished and sent it to the American Museum of Natural History in New York City, where Yvonne Hekala, an assistant professor at Fordham University studying crocodilian diversity, sequenced its genome. When she compared the docile croc's DNA to other Nile crocodiles, she noticed some rather striking differences. Could these tame crocs be an entirely distinct species? DNA analysis of 123 African crocodiles, as well as 57 separate samples from museum specimens, including crocodiles mummified in ancient Egypt, confirmed her suspicion. In a few sections of their respective genomes, all the mild-mannered crocs would have one DNA sequence, and all the typical Nile crocs another. They even had different numbers of chromosomes. That made us very confident that they were actually two different populations, and they were not mixing their DNA, Hekala X says. The two different species had diverged between 3 and 6 million years ago. Crocodilus niloticus in the east and the smaller, less aggressive Crocodilus suchus in the west. The vast majority of mummified crocodiles were C. suchus, suggesting that ancient Egyptians had recognized the difference. Together, Hekala, Oakes, and other scientists helped redraw the map of how crocodilians evolved in space and time and conclusively removed them from the category of living fossils. In the context of the passage, how does the analysis of crocodilian immune system molecules relate to the living fossil theory of crocodilian evolution? Well, I know that it just said they removed them from the category of living fossils. So altogether, they disproved what was the prevailing theory. They disproved the living fossil theory. Now, the immune system molecules is... Where does it say that? I know I read that. I'm not jumping. Here we go. So, okay. Immune system molecules conserved across living crocodilian species were remarkably similar in structure and behavior. So this shows that they had not diverged way back then. They had actually been similar until much more recently. So confirms no, it's the opposite. Suggests the living theory is no. The analysis supports the living fossil theory definitely does not, right? So yeah. Okay. Which of the following statements best summarize Oakes' analysis of Nile crocodiles' DNA as it is presented in the third paragraph in 31? So Oakes noticed something odd about the DNA samples. They didn't match up with each other. And then I thought what happened is that ends up hinting that there's actually two different types of Nile crocodile. It suggests that Nile crocodiles are older than was previously believed, which does not support the living... In fact, the variation between them was great enough to suggest that he was looking at two distinct species. If so, then not only were modern crocodiles much too young to be living fossils, but they had also continued to speciate, as in separate into different species after diverging from their basal ancestor, living fossils not supposed to do. It suggested that different species of crocodiles do not share a basal ancestor. No, they do still share the basal ancestor. It suggested that the analysis was hastily done, which prompted... No. It suggested the DNA came from two species, which did not support... Yeah. Yes. Came from two species, right? So to suggest that he was looking at two distinct species, which does not match with the living fossil theory. The main purpose of the fifth paragraph, 58 to 73, is to... So they bring in all the DNA analysis of many species, and that proves that they're actually two different populations, right? There's the Niloticus and then the Suchus. Describe the DNA analysis that confirmed Niloticus and Suchus were two distinct... I think so. Provide information on the mummification of crocodiles that was pertinent... No. Explain how Hekala revolutionized DNA analysis by comparing... I don't think it revolutionized DNA analysis. It might have revolutionized their understanding of the two different species of crocodiles. Introduce the behavioral differences between... No, because that was mentioned earlier, right? That's the point. According to the passage, molecular analysis revealed that immune system molecules from living crocodilian species were similar in... The immune system, wasn't that back up in the beginning? So, remarkably similar in structure and behavior, right? I hope it says structure and behavior. Yeah. It's weird, right? Because all of a sudden you get a super easy one where it just says it point blank, even though some of them are much more complex decisions to answer it. In the context of the passage, the statement in 47 to 49 mainly serves to... They were so docile that he and his companions could swim beside them without concern. So they could swim with those special Suchus crocodiles that were in Chad. Indicate that Clemens and his companions believe the crocodiles were No. Establish the tameness of the crocodiles in the desert oasis. Yeah. Suggest that Clemens and his companions suspected they were swimming with... No. Indicate the crocodiles in the desert oasis had not full... No. According to the passage, after Clemens sent a tissue sample of a perished crocodile to Hecala then... He sent a tissue sample from one that had recently perished and sent it to the American Museum of Natural... Yeah, and then this person sequenced its genome, right? Is it that? Yeah. In the context of the passage, the detail that Crocodylus niloticus and Crocodylus suchus have different numbers of chromosomes provides support for the claim that the two species... I thought it said that they even have. So they even had different numbers of chromosomes. But let me read the previous sentence. In a few sections of the respective genomes, all the mild-mannered crocs would have one DNA sequence, and all the typical crocs another. They even had different numbers of chromosomes. So it further confirms that they're two different creatures, right? Two different species. Support for the claim that they diverged during the Cretaceous had something, definitely not this, did not evolve from the same ancestor. No, they did still evolve from the same common ancestor. In fact, all life on Earth evolved from the same common ancestor way back when. Now, diverged during the Cretaceous, no, because that was the original living fossil theory that was disproven. So they diverged later, but they still continued to speciate and break further apart into their own multiple species. So it's got to be this. They were not mixing their DNA. I thought it said that somewhere. Oh, I'm sorry. It says it right here. Yeah, sorry. There we go. They were not mixing their DNA. Yeah, 66 and 67. According to the passage, Crocodylus niloticus and Crocodylus suchus diverged between... Doesn't it just say that in the conclusion in right? Yeah, two different species had diverged between 3 and 6. Based on the passage, the phrase redraw the map is most likely meant to be read... Redraw the map. Together, Hecala Oakes and other scientists helped redraw the map of how crocodilians evolved in space and time and conclusively removed them from the category of living fossils. Well, this is metaphorically. They helped redraw the map. They helped reshape our understanding. They help reform the general conception of how it happened. Definitely not literally, because it's not an actual map. Figuratively, scientists amended the narrative of the natural history of crocodiles. I think so. Figuratively, scientists believe their findings would have broader implications on archaeology? No, it's amended the narrative of the natural history of crocodiles, right? Which is H. Now, the timing is, I'm over by 1 minute. But again, reading it aloud and explaining what I'm doing probably accounts for, I don't know, 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes, I would hope. But again, even as someone who's able to focus and read well, you still don't have much extra time on the ACT reading, even with the more lax requirements for the enhanced.